Okay, um, this video is about hives that died out. We get a lot of questions about why did my hive die, what happened to it. Unfortunately, we normally have more questions than answers. Sometimes you just don't know. But this is a hive that's dead, and it's a very typical dead out. When you open it up, you see the cluster of bees down between the two frames. This is a typical dead out. Some of the untypical ones we've been seeing this winter is when there are no bees in the hive, or very few bees and just a few bees on the bottom board. But in this case, this is a typical dead cluster. So we're going to take this apart and see what we've got and try to give you some ideas about what happens. Unfortunately, sometimes the answer is just genetics. You've got a hive that died because they didn't have the genetics to get through. In this particular hive, this was a Russian package, started last spring. It went into the winter looking pretty good and died unexpectedly. We still have pollen in the frames. And there was honey in this frame too. If you look at the edges of all of these cells, the edges are rough and look like they've been ripped open. That is a sign that this hive has been robbed out. This hive wasn't killed during robbing, obviously, because we have a dead winter cluster, but it was probably robbed on the warm days after it died out. So we have a frame of pollen and robbed out cells. Another frame, lots of pollen in this frame, as you can see. It's a good frame. Lots of food, just not lots of honey. It had just a little bit of honey along the edges here. You can see they've been robbed out. Another frame with a big cluster of pollen on the edges. That's all pollen in there. Now this particular hive has or had a marked queen in it. Good typical brood frames, nice hemispheric pattern with a band of pollen around the edges, and it obviously had honey because again the rough robbed out edges, so it had a band of honey going around the edges. Not a lot of honey apparently, but same thing. And there's our dead cluster of bees. I don't see the queen here. I wouldn't expect to, though, on the outside edge of this. So again, a typical cluster of dead bees. In that shingle, they look like shingles on a roof. They're all lined up to maintain heat. And if you clear this out, you've got the dead bees face down inside of the cells. I don't know what that was. Some odd thing. There's even a few unhatched cells of larvae right there. I don't know why the morbid curiosity, but there she is. There's our queen right there. So that queen was in the middle of the cluster. This cluster of bees died from cold. And you can see these cells here. There was a almost fully developed larva in there. So it's hard to tell, besides the fact that they were low on stores. They may have eaten their way out of it, but I don't see any evidence that says, you know, for some reason that these bees were dead or diseased. It's one of the unanswered questions in beekeeping. Why did my hive die? And sometimes we don't have an answer. Sometimes you can see signs of disease. You can see capped larvae where the cappings have been pierced and pulled out and possibly were diseased. In this case, those cells that we just saw, they are sunken and they're punctured, but it's hard to tell because that could have easily happened after this hive died. It's really hard to tell. These hives didn't show signs of disease. They showed really strong. I checked them on the 2nd of January on a warm day, and they were flying and strong and heavy enough with honey. And this hive actually had another super on it that had honey in it. And the 29th of January, they're dead like you see them. So far, that's my experience with this Russian hive this year.